Have you or a loved one ever struggled to make the perfect cat OC or Sona based off of either yourselves, other people, be it real or fictional, and they're never just right? Well, take it from someone who has over 15 years of experience designing cats based off of themselves, their family members, and other loved ones, fictional and non fictional alike. It really doesn't have to be that hard. For this video, I will be using messybeast.com as my resource for the cat genetics, colors, patterns, etc. I'm not sponsored by messybeast.com, however, I still highly recommend you check them out if you ever have questions, thought, whatever related to cats at all. That is messybeast.com. Find the resources I'll be referencing today on the cat end of things. We will start with going to messybeast.com and you see the MessyBeast portal. The top left, the very first button is where we will click. From there, you will go scrolling down below the picture of the cats, and under the green heart with the question mark, you see behavior, training, communication, intelligence, and emotions. The very top of the column beneath that is the next click to take. From there, you will see yourself at the colors and confirmation index. Go to the top link and click there for the charts. I have included a screenshot of what you see as soon as that page loads, just so you know that you are in the right place if you seek out these resources as well, which again, I highly recommend you do. On the human side of things, it is a bit more complex and can be difficult with more genes involved, but we're not going to get too far into it. I'm going to keep things pretty basic and essential. For what we will be looking at, we need to take into consideration melanin, which gives various aspects to their color. With more melanin, a feature is usually darker, with less, it is lighter. So the amount of melanin for any given aspect plays quite a role. Now let's go back to everyone's first biology class and we learn about genes, which come in dominant and recessive. And some of the genes, and I think a lot that we will be working with, are codominant. It probably behoove anyone who doesn't quite remember this and wants to actually follow along with the genetics portion to Google Punnett square and refresh themselves with how that works. It's pretty simple at this level, so if you want to learn the genetics or get started with it again or just refresh yourself, search Punnett square. Please keep in mind that this method is extremely simplistic. That said, before we really start getting into this, we need to connect some dots. In humans, the most dominant hair color is black, and in cats, the most dominant fur color pattern is black tabby, which often looks brown with black stripes. For hair, we're going to go with the thickness one naturally has in their hair, as I don't believe anyone is ever bald their entire life, but I could be wrong. That could just be a rare abnormality. So the thicker your hair naturally is, the longer fur length you would have, and vice versa. The thinner your hair naturally is, the shorter your fur length would be. And yes, I am aware that there is the hairless breed, the Sphinx cat, but that's kind of an outlier in this. This is, again, just a very simplistic, dumbed down, general rule of thumb guide. Cats often have amounts of white, whether it's just a dash on their chest or nose, or a tail tip, or paws and underbelly, or to the point they're nearly white, like a van, or they're solid white even. We are gonna look at skin tones. The darker one's skin is, the less amount of white spotting they would have. I think most people following this would have some amount of white spotting. I think it would be kind of rare, maybe, for someone to, if they did it on like a one-on-one comparison, to end up as a solid color, no white spotting whatsoever, or to be solid white spotting that is just in full 100% there, covering everything else. But again, this is just a guide. People can go to different amounts. There's wiggle room. You can do what you want. This is just to help get you going. Now, I did not list the eye colors on this page, but that's because that one is a little bit trickier, and we will discuss that next. Typically, when learning genetics and one's first encounter with the Punnett squares mentioned prior includes working with eye colors, the very, very basics of human eye color genetics. So what that usually entails is having brown eye, which is dominant, and blue eye, which is recessive, and learning how dominant and recessive interact with each other when you have parents of each color. However, in actuality, it is a bit more complex than that because nothing is really that simple. So we're going to put the recessive blue eyes to the side for right now, and that goes for both cats as well as humans. There isn't necessarily just one way to have brown, one way to have green, etc. Instead, you have like varying amounts of melanin that one can have. It actually gives us a range in various colors from green to hazel to shades of brown. So all of these these would be dominant, with the darkest brown being the most dominant and the less dominant being the less amount of melanin, which would lead you with a green. It is a similar situation in cats, or at least the domestic cats, in which green is your least dominant of the dominant colors that one can have, the least amount of dominant melanin, whereas the copper, which is a very deep, vibrant, almost dark, sometimes orange, that is your most dominant, but typically you see colors in the middle, hazel, yellow, even light oranges at times. Again, that's just like the green and brown in humans, where you see a lot of the browns, usually not too many dark browns, and occasionally you get greens or like green brown, which would be hazel. Now, let's move on to blue eyes and other unusual eye colors you do not see as often. Whereas green and brown are both dominants, with brown being more of the dominant and green being less of the dominant amount, blue is just recessive entirely. That is true for both cats and humans. However, with cats, there are a few other circumstances that allow for blue eyes, with very rare exceptions. So in humans, you can have blue eyes even if both parents have green or brown eyes, if they both carry a gene for blue, which would be the recessive blue and blue. You'd get one from each parent. You could have blue eyes despite your parents having green or brown eye colors. However, in cats, blue is actually usually tied in with coat color, with I assume there are a few exceptions that do exist, because there are always exceptions to everything, it seems like. I assume that is with exceptions, of course. So for blue eyes in cats, you're only really going to see them with an amount of white spotting, or if they are color points, and I believe color point does have some ties to the white spotting gene as well. However, it has been a while since I've actually researched that myself. Not nearly as common, but also still a thing in both cats and humans alike, and not too terribly uncommon either, is heterochromia. That is where you have one blue eye and one eye color of another color, whether that's green or brown amber or somewhere in between those. As I understand it, one of the eyes must always be blue with odd eyes or heterochromia, and that is both in cats and humans. However, I could be incorrect on that, especially in regards to humans. But in cats, that seems to almost always be the case where it does show up. There must be one blue eye present. The only instance in which there wouldn't be is if there's like chimerism or some other unlikely mutation at play. So not impossible to have green and brown or green and amber, however, not incredibly likely either. Less common than that is dichroic eyes, in which you have two separate colors in one eye, and they are each very separate and distinct and individual from each other, despite both showing up in the same iris. Again, as far as I'm aware, dichroic is not nearly as common as odd eyes. I've known multiple cats who have had odd eyes, and I used to go to school with someone who had heterochromia as well. My brother currently has a kitten who seems to have dichroic eyes, which is very striking and cool, but he's the only cat I've ever known to have that, and I never even really knew about it until this kitten came into our life about a year ago. And I have never met any human with dichroic eyes, at least not that I'm aware of. All that to say that odd eyes is significantly more common than dichroic, and heterochromia in cats seems to be more common than it is in humans. As far as albinism goes, I would highly suggest that one does not use the albinistic eye colors unless they actually have albinism themselves, at least in this circumstance. Black is a very common color in cats and is the most dominant of colors, as it is in human hair color as well, and similarly, most humans do have black hair. Of course, there are other colors as well in cats. These are variations from black and not as common as black itself. One of these is a brown called chocolate, which is similar in appearance to brunette in humans. The second form of the black color in cats is cinnamon, which can be confused with red when one looks at it, though cinnamon tends to be a bit darker than actual red. Of course, due to the ranges that the colors can show up on a cat's fur, when looking at them, sometimes it can be difficult, just in general, to tell certain colors from other colors, and sometimes it may not even be possible depending on one's skill level or just exactly how it looks on the cat, just at a glance. For cat to human, I'd place black as black, and chocolate would be brunette, and then cinnamon would essentially be auburn or sorrel, those being brown with a hint of red in the case of auburn, or a lighter color orange for sorrel. That said, one could also use cinnamon as just a paler, lighter version of brunette brown. So if you have like light brown hair, one could put that more with cinnamon instead of using chocolate. There is a lot of wiggle room here. And when we get into the red series and calico tortoiseshells, that will also bring up another point for humans with auburn or sorrel hair, an additional possibility of how to interpret auburn sorrel hair into a cat design. So next we're going to discuss the dilutes. The dilute of black is called blue for cats, and essentially it would be a dirty blonde. It could also be used as just like a general or generic blonde, whereas blonde, but no more needs to be said, it's just blonde. I think most blondes would probably fit into this category, however, it is case by case, and again, it ultimately comes down to personal preference with how you want to interpret it for your own design. Lilac or lavender is a truer blonde, I suppose one could say. Lavender tends to be paler and sometimes brighter, but it would still be a blonde. Think of blue on cats, which is essentially just gray, as we would normally call it. Think of blue as a sandy brown, or rather a pale brunette, whereas lavender is a golden blonde or like a wheat blonde. Next, we dilute cinnamon, and that gives us fawn, which is a blondish color and can be confused with cream in cats, both of which can be called buff by cat lovers, such as in rescues or just cat appreciation groups, etc. I tend to keep my interpretation of fawn as a less red blonde, whereas red cat coat color would translate to red hair. Cinnamon is a pale brown or reddish brown, and that makes the look similar as well, but while fawn is a light blonde in general, I usually interpret cream as either a pale red hair color or strawberry blonde sort of range. Another way that I imagine the difference between fawn and cream is fawn is like those guys who are blonde and then their facial hair is either blonde or a brownish, whereas cream is the guys who are blonde, but then their facial hair is red, if that makes any sense to anyone else. I don't know, but that makes sense to me. As the chart in this section shows, the dilutes can be modified, but I don't really mess with that as it gets a bit too nitpicky for my tastes and preferences. So let's talk about red cats next. The red that most of us are familiar with is actually sex-linked. I recently discovered that there is a non-sex-linked red in cats. However, I am still very uncertain how exactly it works, and I need to do a lot more research on it before I really speak about it. I discovered it while looking up the coat colors for Abyssinian cats. I have wondered for years and years why you don't see tortoiseshell Abyssinians. Turns out their non-red and the red are very similar, and even their average Rudy is also, with the ticking and the banding of their coats, the way they're supposed to be at least by breed standard, you find that it can be really difficult to tell red from the other colors such as the black base that looks ruddy and the non-sex linked red. So oftentimes apparently breeders can't always tell if their queen is a tortoiseshell technically, or if she's red, or if she's the non-sex linked red as opposed to the typical red we see in cats. So when it comes to a dominant colored Abyssinian queen, one may not know her actual genotype until she reproduces with various other toms and you have certain results. Of course, you may just by chance never get results would actually fully reveal what she is, and so there are probably a lot of tortoiseshell Abyssinian ladies who are never found to be tortoiseshell because the colors, especially with the tabby ticking, it's just so hard to tell them apart, the different colors, that they just look like they're one color as an Abyssinian would be, I guess. But let's get back on track with the common red that is in fact sex-linked. There are a few things to know about the sex-linked red gene. Tom gets his red only from his mother, whereas his sisters will get it from both of their parents depending on if either has it or not. In theory, it is impossible for a tortoiseshell tomcat to exist. However, there are exceptions to just about everything. Sometimes tortoiseshell tomcats are in fact born. Most die before they're too old, and those who do live into adulthood are typically sterile and fertile. I can't remember the exact difference between those words at the moment. However, there is, at least last time I checked, one tortoiseshell tomcat on record who grew not only to adulthood, but also managed to father a litter of kittens. I'm not sure if there have been any more since because I don't feel like looking right now, but there's definitely been at least one, so don't get on me about that. Exceptions exist to just about everything, with exceptions, of course. And even if somehow we were mistaken about that one tortoiseshell tom father on record, odds are there has been a tortoiseshell tom who grew up and had kittens with a queen. Even if we don't know about it, it's probably happened at least once. Another thing to note about the genetic red is that it always shows tabby markings, even if they're very faint, they will still be there technically. The thing is, if you have a cat who shouldn't genetically be tabby and it's red, it will still show, at least to some degree, stripes or tabby markings on their pelt in the red. There are times when the tabby markings on red and cream cats is so faint that you don't even see them and they look solid, even though by the nature of red, it can't technically be actually solid, even if it genetically is. It's the whole thing. Basically, red usually has stripes, whether parents have stripes or not. For humans, red and cream is pretty simple in that it would be red like ginger or blonde, cream or a strawberry blonde, as mentioned previously. At this level, it actually isn't too difficult when comparing to human hair color, the cat red gene. For a human to have red hair, both parents must be carrying the gene for red. Mind you, this is super simplified, so there's probably a lot more actually at play, but this is our basic overview. So the person gets one red from each parent. They have red hair in its purest reddest form. And red hair in humans is actually rarer than blonde hair, and blonde is generally about recessive as you go, but red is actually less common and rarer just by a bit. So an offspring cannot have red color show up unless red was already introduced to the gene pool before them. That is the case for both humans and cats alike.